I'm Jess Archer. I'm on the core team at Laravel, and in case you can't tell from my accent, I'm from Brisbane, Australia. So today we're here to talk about Laravel Prompts. So Laravel Prompts is a PHP package for creating beautiful and user-friendly prompts for your command line applications. Now, the prompts we have at the moment come from Symfony, and they have treated us very, very well. But perhaps you've seen prompts in other ecosystems, like maybe the Vue installer, where they've kind of raised the bar a little bit, and this inspired me to see what we could do in PHP. So let's jump straight into a demo, and you can see what this thing looks like. All right, so I've got a demo command here, and the way this is going to work is I'm going to show you the kind of equivalent Symfony command first, just to give you some context, and then I'll show you the equivalent in the new prompts library. So to start off, we're going to talk about text input. So this is when we want to just get a string of text from the user. And so currently with Symfony, we would use this ask and then the question we want to ask. So I'm going to run this now. And this is what this currently looks like. So it's pretty good. I can type in here Jess, and we get back the string after that. If I run this again and I press enter, we get this null value, and we can handle this, but the text input doesn't have a way to kind of validate that the input and kind of like return the user and say like there was a problem with this. So there's something I have been using internally. Let me just comment this one out, and we'll come down to this next one called ask persistently. This is like a thing I've just added inline in this command. And this is how I used to do things. So I'd go into this while loop, and we kind of loop over until, like, while ever the answer is null, we'll just keep asking the question, and we'll show an error if it's not right. So let's go and run this one, and we can see what this looks like. So if I press enter, it just keeps kind of spitting down the page. And this works, but it's not the nicest user experience where it kind of keeps going down the page. So let's have a look now at the new prompts and see what this looks like. First, I'll just let this be happy with that. Cool. All right, we'll comment out this one. So with Laravel Prompts, you'll be importing a namespaced function. So we see we've got use function Laravel Prompts text. And the API is pretty similar to the existing prompts. I tend to like to use the named parameters because there are quite a lot of extra options in here, and we sometimes just want a couple of them. So let's start off with this first one where we're just going to ask, what is your name? So let's run this one. And so this is what the new text prompt looks like by default. So I can start typing in here. I can use the arrow keys. I can use the delete keys, all the sort of stuff you'd expect. If I start typing really long, we kind of like scroll over here. I can still move the arrows back and delete and all that sort of stuff. So if I go ahead and submit this one, we get the string as we'd expect. With this one, we're always going to return a string. So if we just hit enter, we're just going to get an empty string back. So let's have a look at some other features, though, that we can use with this. So first off, let's talk about placeholders. So I'm sure most of you have probably been designing websites and have used the placeholder tag on the input element. And this lets us give some context to the user of the kind of text that we're expecting them to enter. So let's type placeholder, and we'll just give an example. We'll say e.g. Taylor Otwell. So let's run this one now. And so now we've got a placeholder in here. As soon as I type a letter, that placeholder is going to go away. If I hit backspace, that comes back again. So that's pretty handy. Let's just fill this one out. All right, now, as with the Symfony prompts, we can do a default value. So maybe you've got an existing user instance and you want to like pass their name in and let them change it though if they want to. In this case, I'm just going to fill it in, make the default Jess. And as you'd expect, this just pre-fills this straight away, and I can go in and I could write my full name, I could backspace it, do whatever I want to do there. Now, one thing that's kind of cool with this is I can press Control-C, and we have this cool canceled state for the last input, whenever it's been canceled. It'll kind of cross through that input. But now let's talk about some validation stuff. So let's go and delete this default. Now, the most common scenario I need is just to say this text is required. And we saw that example with the ask persistently. So let's come in here and we'll say required true. We'll run this one. And if I just try and hit enter now, we get a validation error right there. It doesn't have to spit down the screen or anything like that. Now, if I start typing a letter, it straight away is going to say that that's valid now. So once you hit that enter key the first time, it kind of switches into a live validation mode. It doesn't validate immediately, because if you've ever been on the web and you have those fields that's like, what's your email address? And you type the first letter, and they all of a sudden say that email address is invalid, and you're like, yeah, I haven't finished typing it yet. So we don't validate until the enter is pressed, but from that point on, it starts to go into live validation mode. So if I press backspace again, it's going to say that it's required. Now, the error message here just says required. If you want to customize that, let's just cancel this one. We can also pass a string here. So we could say the name is required. And now when I try and submit this, we get our error message here. So let's go ahead and fill this one in. Now, for more advanced cases, let's comment this out, and we'll come down to this example here where we've got this validate callback. So in here, we can do any logic we want and return a string if there's an error message to be shown. So in this case, I'm still saying it's required, so we get an error message if they enter nothing. But then I can also customize other errors based on the content. So the value that's passed in here is what they've typed so far. And then in this case, I'm just checking if the string length is less than 3, and if so, I'll show an error. So we can come and run this one. And you'll see if I type, we're not getting any errors yet. I can type. Let's just do 2. I hit enter. The name must be at least 3 characters. Push that one more character, and we're good to go. And you'll notice if I backspace, it kind of changes the error based on like which one came first. All right, let's cancel that one. We'll comment out this one. And now we'll move on to the next one. So passwords in Symfony, let's have a look what this looks like at the moment. So we use the secret in Symfony. And so it asks, what is your password? Now, if I start typing in here, you don't get any feedback of what you're typing, anything like that. You can't really like easily move the cursor back and do anything you want there. So let's just submit this one. We get the string back as we would expect. But let's have a look what this looks like in prompts now. So come down to here. So now we're importing the password. I like to call them components, but it's really a function. So let's do this one. It's already required. All right, so we'll go like this. And you can see that we're getting this kind of nice input. I can move the cursor back, all those sorts of things you'd expect. And I hit enter, and we get our string back. All right, let's move on to the next one. So confirmation. So this is when we want to basically ask a true or false, yes or no kind of question. So if we run this, the Symfony version of this, that's not too bad. We get, are you having a good time? It kind of appends this yes, no, so you have a clue of how you've got to make it pass. You can pass a default, which it shows you. And then you can type anything that starts with Y, and it will return true, and anything else will return false. So I could actually say yeah, and we get true. So that's kind of cool. But let's have a look at this with prompts now. So we'll come down to this one here. So this one is the confirm function. We'll come over here and we'll run this one. And so now we've got this little thing here. Now I can use the arrow keys to switch between them. I can go so I can use the left, right, up, down. I can hit the tab key. I can hit Y, and it'll always go to yes, and will always go to no. And if we are having a good time, which I hope we are, then we will say yes, and we'll get back our true value. Now, we can do a few little things to customize this. So if we don't want to say yes or no, maybe we want to say I agree or something along those lines, we can customize what yes says. So we'll say yeah, and for the no, we'll say nah. So we can run this one, and we've got yeah, nah. But I still think yeah. Now, something else you can do is you can do validation on this. Now, most of the time it probably doesn't make sense, but maybe you've got a terms and conditions or something along those sorts of lines in your command line application. We can say required true. And so now when I try and say nah, it's required, and I can customize the message, of course. And then you'll even notice when we switch between them, it's kind of like gone to that live validation mode now. We'll say yeah, and we get our true value. All right, let's move on to the next one. So choices. So this is when we want to ask the user for a set of specific values. So we want them to choose one of the options that we've pre-selected. Now, in Symfony, you can pass a list array like this, where we don't specify the keys. We just get numeric keys. And so then we just using the values. So let's go ahead and run this one in Symfony. And this is pretty good. We can see the number. We can type the number, or we can type the name. I could start typing, but if I type RE, it's not really helping us out here for read only. So we've got to go capital RE, and then it'll help us out. So I can enter on that, and we'll get this one. Now this one does have some validation built in. If I try and do nothing here, we'll get an error because we didn't set a default value for this one. So let's just go ahead and make this one happy. Let's say we're going to be an owner, and see, you can't tab complete that one. Owner, there we go. All right, so let's have a look at this now in the new prompts library. Whoops. So we'll come down here. Oh, sorry. First of all, I also wanted to show you what it looks like with an associative array. So this is great when you've got kind of these computer-friendly keys and then the user-friendly strings. You want them to choose the human-friendly one, but you want the other one back. When we run this with the current Symfony prompts, the thing I don't love about this is that it shows us that kind of computer-friendly one as well, and it's kind of like duplicates all that writing. It does mean if I happen to type a lowercase r, it'll match against the key as well. And you can use the arrow keys and cycle through the options here, but it's not my favorite. There are reasons why they did it this way, and I appreciate that, but I want to kind of show you what we can do now. So let's go and make this one happy, and we'll comment out this. Okay, so this prompt we're calling select because it's kind of like you'd use it the same way you'd use a select box on the internet. So I'm going straight to passing an associative array here because from the user's perspective, they won't notice any difference. It just affects whether we get back the value or the key, whether we pass an associative array or a list array. So let's go and run this one. And this is what this select component looks like now. Now you might notice on the right-hand side here, we've got this scroll bar. So I can come down here, and it's going to scroll down and indicate kind of where we are. So we know we're at the bottom now. If I press the down arrow, we're going to cycle around to the top. And you can't see the keys or anything like that. So I can come in here and we'll say read only, and we get that key back. Now this one doesn't really make sense to have a required option for because it's just a subset of options. But let's come and talk about something else now. So we're going to come down to the multi-select. So in Symfony, you use the same choice method. You just pass multiple true. So let's have a look what this one looks like. And this one looks, at least at the moment, like exactly the same as the single select. So there's nothing here that's kind of letting me know I can actually choose multiple options. So you maybe have to like phrase it in the way you ask the question. Now the way you would choose multiple options is also not super intuitive. For those that don't know, you've got to use a comma separated. So I could start typing, I can use the arrow keys here. So I could say like force delete, and then I can do a comma. But now I can't use the arrow keys anymore. I can still get some tab completion though. So I can say view, and I can also kind of do duplicates here, and we'll get back those values. So it works pretty good, but I want to show you what we can do now. So let's comment out that one, and we'll come down to this one. So with Laravel Prompts, it's an entirely separate function called multi-select because it's a fair bit different in terms of the way that it looks and behaves. So it kind of made sense just to keep it as a separate function. So in this case, we're asking what permissions the user should have, and then we have all of these options. So let's go ahead and run this one. And this one looks a little bit like the select one, except instead of that little round radio button style thing, we've now got a square that's kind of indicating like a checkbox. So I can use the arrow keys to come down. Something else you can do here is you can use HJKL to navigate these for the Vim users out there. I built that in. Don't know if Taylor knows about that one. And so I can come down and I can hit the spacebar to select the options that I want. I can't choose the same option twice because it's just inherently doesn't let you. So I'm happy with those options. I'll hit enter and I'll get back those keys that I wanted there. And the submitted state for this as well kind of changes into this submitted state where it no longer shows you all of the options. It just shows you the ones that were selected. All right, let's move on to the next one. Oh, actually, one thing I want to show you here. Let's quickly back this out. Let's come down, and when we run this one, I can actually just hit enter here, and we'll get back nothing. So the Symfony ones, you have to enter a value. So if you try and hit enter, you get that error. So if you want to allow them to select nothing, like 0 or more in the multi-select, you've got to like add an option called none, and then so they can choose none, and then you've got to like remove that from the result you get back. So with the prompts, you can just by default enter nothing. So it's a 0 or more kind of idea. But if we come in here and we just say, oops, required true. Now if I try and enter none, then we get our validation error. And you can, of course, do validation callbacks. Maybe you've got some combination of options that are invalid together. You can kind of customize the errors and the handling and all that sort of stuff. So we'll cancel out that one. All right, so now let's talk about auto-completion. So Symfony gives us this cool thing. I can't remember what they call it internally. We've called it anticipate. We also have ask with completion as an alias for it. So what this one does is it's kind of like a text input, but if they happen to type something that starts with one of these values we're passing in here, then it will help them pre-fill those. So let's look at the Symfony version. So straight away, it just looks like the text input. If I type a lowercase j, we don't get any help, no indications. When I'm back here, I can press the arrow keys and start to cycle through the options, but it's not really obvious behavior. It's kind of like a power user knowledge. And if I type capital J, it jumps straight to the first option that matches, so it doesn't kind of let me know, but I can cycle through again here and choose that. So that's pretty cool, but we've now got this suggest component in prompts. Same sort of API, label, options, and this one takes a placeholder, of course, which the Symfony one doesn't have. All right, so this one also looks similar to a text input, but before we've typed anything, we have this little arrow on the right-hand side. If I push the down arrow, which is hopefully intuitive, we can actually go and see all of the options that are available to us and scroll through this list. Once we get to the bottom, it'll go back to the top. So we can kind of cycle through these. So I could come down, find my name here. We're good to go. Now, both the Symfony one and the Laravel one allow you to type anything you want. So I could type anything, and that's fine, because it's not trying to restrict them. It's just trying to help them if they happen to be typing something that we know about. But yeah, so one other thing is I can type a lowercase j, and it will match my name here, and we can kind of see all the j options straight away, which is nice. If I type es, we don't get my name here because it only matches from the start of the string, case insensitively, but we can customize this. So let's go and cancel this one, and we'll comment out this. So just like with the Symfony equivalent, we can pass a callback here instead. The callback will receive the value that the user has typed so far, and in this case, we're just going to filter this collection and find things where the string contains it, anywhere inside the string, and we're going to ignore the case. So let's just go ahead and run this one. And so now I could type ES, and we'll get anything that matches that. So you can customize this and do kind of whatever you need to do in your command line applications. So we'll come down here and choose Jess. All right, let's comment out this one. Okay, so now this is a component that doesn't have an equivalent in Symfony. And this one is what we're calling search. And this one's kind of like a hybrid between the select and the suggest. Now, this one only accepts a callback. Now, with the suggest one, something important to note with that one as well is that it doesn't accept an associative array because it doesn't really make sense to return the key for whatever they've typed, because we don't know if they've typed, like if they typed JESS and there was a different key, if they didn't actually select it, then we don't know which one they selected. So that one's always just returning values. Search is kind of the opposite. It only ever returns the keys. Now, in this example, we're going to take the value that they've entered. If the string length is greater than 0, we're going to query using Eloquent and find all of the records in the database where the name is like this, and so it's basically anywhere inside the name with the percentage signs. We're going to pull out just the name, and then we're going to key the array by the ID. So we'll end up with that associative array of the user ID and then their name. And if the string length was 0, we're just going to return an empty array, but you could also return something here as well for like your default option when nothing has been typed. So let's run this one. And straight away, you can kind of hint it with your placeholder, but if I start typing here, this is now querying Eloquent with some data I seeded earlier. I can come in here. There is a kind of loading thing if it's trying to load stuff from the database, but it's just so quick in every realistic scenario I could create that I never actually get to see it. If I come and choose this value, we get back the user ID, which is really handy. And this one doesn't let us just enter anything arbitrary. So if I hit enter, nothing's going to happen there. So this one's really about searching for a specific record. So let's go and choose that one. All right, so now let's have a look at how we're using these internally in the framework in the various artisan commands. So let's start off with artisan make. So recently in Laravel, we added the ability that when you type artisan make model and you don't enter the model name, it will prompt you for the model name using the Symfony prompts. Because I don't know about you, but when I want to make something in Laravel, I'll often go artisan make model, and then I'll always run -- help first to see all the options I want, and then I'll start constructing the command so that it creates my migrations and whatever else I might want. So let's go ahead and run artisan make model without anything in there, and it's going to prompt us for our model name. Now we're using the So we're using the placeholder functionality here to give the user a kind of serving suggestion, if you will, of what the kind of convention is. So let's go with this example of a flight model. It then asks if we'd like any of the following. So I can come through here. I can say, so let's say I want database seeder, some form requests, and a migration, and it'll go ahead and create those. Now, I forgot to create a controller, so let's clear this and say artisan make, and A is just my alias for PHP artisan, by the way. So artisan make controller. So again, we get this thing that gives us the conventions of Laravel, so it's a singular user controller. I'm going to go ahead and create a flight controller, which is a pretty cool name. And it asks us which type of controller we would like, so I'm going to say I want a resource controller. And then this next bit is really cool. So this is an optional step, but it's what model should this resource controller be for? So I can go ahead and type the model name, but we've also auto-detected the models that are in the system. So I can just come down here. And I can create that for that flight model. So let's now clear this one. I'll look at a few more examples just to show you some extra stuff here. So if we go make event, I really like this one because when I create events, I always go to the Laravel docs to find out, like, what's the convention for naming an event? Is it kind of past tense, present tense? How does it work? So we've got these examples that come straight from the docs. So in this case, it's in the past tense. The podcast was processed. So let's use that example, podcast processed, and we have our event. If we go and make a listener, we've got this example here, send podcast notification. So we can kind of see this nice mapping of, like, when the podcast is processed, we want to send the podcast notification. So we'll use that example, and then ask which event should be listened for, and maybe you can already guess that we can come down and choose the events that we have in our system, and that will go ahead and map that all up for us. So now when that event fires, the listener will fire. All right, so let's move on to some other commands. So if we look at the vendor publish command, let's type the full one, PHP artisan vendor publish. Tab complete that one. So if you've seen this one before, you can get a really long list, and sometimes the Symfony components can make it a little bit hard when you've got these really big lists. So using our select component, we can customize the height of the scroll. So in this case, we've said we want to, I think, show, is it 10, 15? Not sure, but we can choose how many lines we want to show before it scrolls, because this list gets really big. But now I can kind of just come down, choose the one I want to publish, and then we're good to go. One last one is the docs command, so PHP artisan docs. This is one that Tim McDonald created. This allows you to jump to the Laravel docs. And we're using the suggest component for this one. And the great thing I like about that is I can make it so that when I type COL for collections, it gives us the main collections page, but it also matches the eloquent collections page. Similarly, if I try and type something like valet, it'll give us valet even though it starts with Laravel. So I find that it's really handy to use that string contains version for these types of use cases. And of course, if I come down here and choose valet, it would open my browser to the right URL for that. All right, let's now talk about the Laravel installer. So normally we might do Laravel new, and previously if you didn't type anything, you'd get an error that the name argument is required, and so then you might run -- help and see all the various options you want to do as well. So let's go and clear this one, and we'll say Laravel new. Now this is still a work in progress. It's still a little bit experimental, so you're getting a little bit of a sneak preview on this one. All right, so this is going to ask us what the name of our project is. We've got this little ASCII art I designed. I don't know if that's going to work in all terminals, so I've got to still test that one, but I can type in the name of my project. So in this case, I'm working on a side project called Heirloom, so we'll go heirloom.cloud. I can then choose my starter kit if I would like one. So I like Laravel Breeze, we'll choose that. We can now ask which Breeze stack we'd like to install, so it's kind of specific to the Breeze version. So we'll go View with Inertia is my favorite. Would we like any optional features? Sure, let's have dark mode and SSR. And which testing framework do you prefer? So we can get pest straight away out of the box. So let's choose that one. And then would you like to initialize a Git repository? Of course. And that will go ahead and create that. It's not going to work very well when I don't have internet, but you can kind of see how that works. Now, if I was to say Laravel new, and let's just call it test, and let's say I do -- jet, so I've provided some of the options, it's going to jump straight to the questions for the stack for Jetstream. So it'll skip over everything that it already knows based on what was given. And you can also pass the -n flag or -- no interaction, and that will prevent it from prompting you at all if you need to do this in some sort of a script or something like that. So let's cancel out of that one. And now let's have a talk about how we can add this functionality to our own commands. So let's say artisan make command. We'll go with the example here, send emails. And let's open up this send emails command here. Let's come down to the signature, and let's customize this to be mail send. We're going to take a required argument of user, and let's add an option for queue. I'm going to come down to the handle method, and let's just dd this argument user and this option queue. All right, so if we run this one, artisan mail send, then we get not enough arguments. So the user argument is required, and unfortunately, our handle method hasn't even been called because Symfony's console has come in and said that's a required argument, so it doesn't even execute the handle method. So if you're wondering how you might add these prompts to your command, one way you could do it is to make all of the arguments optional, but then when you look at the help for that command, they'll show as optional, even though they're not really. So internally, we've created this interface with a trait and stuff that will kind of add this sort of stuff for you and helps you, it hooks into Symfony earlier on. So if I implement prompts for missing input, and then let's just run this one, artisan mail send. So straight away, it's automatically going to prompt us. It's going to phrase the question, what is the, and then the name of your option there. And so I could type in the user ID, and then that will get into our handle method now. Now, let's say we want to customize the question that's asked. So in Symfony's console commands and Laravel's console commands, you can add a colon here and then put the description. So I could say the user ID that should receive the mail. And this is typically only used in the help screen when you go -- help. But we're also using this now in the prompts for missing input. And so it will use that question instead. Now, let's say that we want to have different text for our description than we do for our prompt. Well, we can come down and we can implement this method, protected function, prompts for missing arguments using this one. So I can return an array here. So we'll say return. Now the keys here are the names of the arguments. So in this case, we had user, and then we can say which user ID. What did I say? What is? So we'll say which user ID should receive the email. So we'll cancel the one we had there, and let's run this one. So now we've used that, and we have, it's kind of separated from the signature of that. Now let's say, though, we want to add one of those placeholders, because they really can be quite helpful to give an example of this. So let's come in, and instead of returning a string from this one, let's turn this into a little tuple array here. And the second argument here will be EG 1, 2, 3. So we'll run this one. And so now we've got that placeholder text there that lets us know, OK, they're expecting a user ID. I'm going to type a user ID, whatever it might be. And then we get that. But if you've ever built these kind of commands that take a user ID, you might have to go into like Tinker to actually find the name of the user and then convert that to an ID. So let's say we want to make our prompt just do that automatically for us. So let's clear this out. And instead of returning an array here, let's delete this, and we'll return a callback instead. And let's just jump back to, my muscle memory is not helping me right now. We'll go back to the demo. All right, so let's grab the search one that we created earlier and paste this one in here. We'll import the search and the user model. And let's just give that a format with Pint. All right, so now we can choose any of the prompts we want to prompt for these missing arguments. So in this case, you might have already guessed, if we say mail send, we can now select the user, so I could just type my name, come down, hit enter, and then it knows user ID 6 is who should receive that mail. Now, let's say we want to also prompt them about this queue option, which is optional, so it won't be prompted automatically because prompts for missing arguments is prompting for arguments, not options, and required ones. But let's say that we only want to prompt them for the queue option after we've already been prompting them. So we do that with the artisan make commands. If you type artisan make model and the name of your model and press enter, we're going to assume you know what you want, and so we just go straight through. So if you want to add that same sort of functionality, you can come in here and say protected function after prompting for missing arguments, and we can do anything we want in here. So I'm going to say this input set option queue, and I'm going to set this using the confirm prompt, and we'll say should the mail be queued, and we can pass in a default value here. So let's say this option queue. So if they did put anything on the command line, we'd kind of respect that as the default. And let's come over and run this one. So now we can select our user, and now it'll ask us, should the mail be queued? We can come and say yes, and those values are passed to our handle method. All right, so how do I get Laravel prompts? We're planning on launching this next week. It's going to come out of the box with Laravel, so you won't need to install any separate packages. We're not making any changes to the existing prompt methods because the method signatures and the returns are a little bit different between them, so we didn't want to mess up your existing commands. But all of the Laravel built-in artisan commands have already been switched to Laravel prompts, and we'll be tagging that soon. Now, there are some environments where these prompts don't work, and the main one is Windows when you're not using WSL. So the PHP version of Windows is missing some features to do with readline that just makes these prompts not work. So in those environments, we configure it to automatically fall back to Symfony. And the other cool thing about this is you can use it with anything. It's not Laravel specific. You can compose and require this in any PHP package you want and add prompts to any command line application. Now, there's one last little thing I wanted to kind of cover, which is how does it work? Now, I could do an entire talk on how does it work, and I started this talk kind of trying to cover that. So I'm just going to give you a tiny little sneak peek of how it works. And the main thing behind it is ANSI escape sequences. So this is how we can communicate with the terminal to get it to do different things. And in PHP, we can just echo these out. And an ANSI escape sequences always starts with an escape character, followed by a left square bracket, and then whichever parameter bytes is what they officially call it for which kind of thing you want to do. So I've got some examples here of 31M will set the foreground color to red, 5A will move the cursor up 5 lines, you can clear the current line, hide the console cursor, all these sorts of things. If you want to know more about that, you can click, you can't click on it, but you can have a look at this Wikipedia link I've included here. But using this, we can do all sorts of cool stuff. So to finish out, let's just have a look. We'll say PHP artisan, thank you.
Thank
you.
I mean, that was incredible. I don't know how you keep hitting home runs like that. So I think, man, a lot of questions. I think my main question is, at Laravel, the company.
Yep.
How does this work? Did you come up with this idea? Did you see this all the way through? You seem to be picking off lots of quality of life improvements that affect me personally, so thank you. How does that work inside the company?
Okay, so it kind of depends from feature to feature. A lot of the time, Taylor will kind of just give me, can you explore this idea? And that's kind of what I get, and then I go off and do it, and kind of then present a proof of concept, and then we kind of work forward from that. In the case of prompts, I have actually wanted to do this since before joining Laravel, but I knew how much of a big undertaking it was, so once I started at Laravel and I started adding those, the make model prompt stuff, I really started to feel the pain of not having certain things that I wanted. So I'm like, okay, now's the time to go and experiment with this idea. Taylor thankfully gave me the green light to spend a whole bunch of time working on it and kind of doing the proof of concept, tweaking it, and we liked it, so we just kept exploring with it and see what we could do with it.
Well, you should be very proud. It's unbelievably good. Y'all give it up for Jess Archer. Good job.
Thank you.